Hi there and welcome to another quickish tip. It's very basic this time. I want to show you how to get a nice scratch map or a dirt map using either the dirt in Octane, that's otherwise known in other renderers as Ambient Occlusion, or using a Vertex map or Vertex Maps for the same effect. So yeah, everyone retries. I made it to another quickish tip. Hopefully you will like it, although using those maps is very basic knowledge in 3D shading. Maybe one or the other will see it as a useful advice. Right, so let's get started. The first thing I'm going to show you is, of course, how to access the tools. So let's make a diffuse material and then assign it to the material preview here. Let's get the rendering starting and go inside of the material in the node editor. And here you can say we have, for one, we have the dirt node that you can use. And the other one that you can use is the vertex map. A little note here. The Vertex map is natively supported in the 2018 version. If you're still working with a 4.0 version, it is not natively supported. So there's internal things that Ahmed, the programmer of the Cinema 4D plugin, did to make it work, but those can never work as good as native supported Vertex maps. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. Let's get rid of the Vertex map for now and plug that into the diffuse. The diffuse is normally a very good option to debug, as I call it, and to see what's actually happening in the shader. You can also access the solo node, where you then get rid of all the lighting information and only see what the actual node that you've clicked is doing. So when you want to do scratches, you want to have the edges that are convex pointing at you with the scratches. So we need to set something here. Right now, the node here is filling in the gaps or the crevices of the object. So we don't want that right now. This is for dirt, as the node suggests. But when we want to have it as a scratch map, we need to invert the normal. And this then gives us the effect of the dirt as if it was inside of the object. Now this can lead to problems, as you can see here. When the dirt has a too big of a radius, it reaches the other side of thin walled objects, and therefore using the ambient occlusion on the other side. So we have to make this smaller to get rid of the effect. Let's make it 0.25. And it's still a little bit of darkness in here, so let's reduce it further to 0.15 or something. Yeah, now it looks better. And let's increase the strength. Well, maybe not to 10. And let's reduce it further. So something like that is okay. I don't bother about this little darkish tint here. So now we basically made a shader that's giving us a mask for the edges. And this is actually essentially what we are going to do. We are creating masks to place certain features of shaders to some area of the shader where it belongs. So how do you do that? So let's make this a little bit bigger here, or move it somewhere. It's a bit tricky here with my screen. So here we go. Disable solo. And we need to give this mask some attributes. So what could we do? We get a mix and pipe that dirt map in as an amount. So what we can do now is we could give the material a color. So let's scroll up here and go to RGB spectrum and give this material a slightly red color. And if you see that, what I did right now is use the wrong port. So if you have the overall shader and want to give it a red color, you can do that. and the rest can have maybe a green color. So you can see that the parts that are supposed to be scratches are green right now. Now, obviously, we don't want to have a red and green material. We want the green part to be metal and the red part to be a normal paint or something. So instead of using a single material, the best way to do that is to use a mix or a blend material. So let me just set this up real quick. So I've created a submaterial in the blend material that is a glossy material and a submaterial that is a metal material. If you are wondering why the previews are so small, this is because the metal and the other material has more pins than a diffuse material. And to make it look like it should, you can go ahead and hide all and then show all. And this is basically a trick to get a clean layout with all the pins showing up as you want it. So basically we use our mask right now to blend between those two materials. So let's assign them. And obviously we need to copy our shader from here to the mix material. And I bet this is going the wrong way, so let's see. Oh yeah, and we don't need the colors, of course, we only need the black and white mask. And yes, as I said, it's the wrong way, so we get our paint on the edges and the metal everywhere else. So you either could just exchange those two materials, that's what I will do, or you can invert the shader. And this is not the invert, so you need to invert that by dragging in an invert node. But I want to keep it as simple as possible always for the renderer, so I'll, rather than to introduce more nodes, just switch the material. Right, let's make this look a little bit better. Obviously the white material isn't a good choice for metal edges because you don't see the metal very good, so let's make this a rather dark material, blackish and a little bit rougher. Here we go. So now you can see that the effect we are getting is rather uniform, and that's not how used areas usually behave. We want some variation. So to get this variation, we are going to use one of my usual dirt library materials, or dirt library image textures. So let's bring in an image texture. And let's see how this is looking by just dragging into the diffuse. So my object here is actually UV mapped, so everything in there is having its own UVs, which is great for production, but I normally don't UV all my objects. So what you can do is to just go and create a triplanar texture. So that's what I'm going to do here. You can follow my triplanar tutorial if you don't know how to set that up. I'm going over that here real quick. So you need a projection, and the projection should be set to triplanar. Then you need a transform to control the size of the triplanar mapping. And last but not least, you need a triplanar node to get the triplanar effect going. I usually set that to single texture at X and then turn off all the other ports except X. And then we have a triplanar projection here. Now you can see why I chose to have a transform, because the projection right now is much too large. And we can see it gets pixelated. So what we want to do is go into the transform and shrink it down to a value where it's looking great. So the best thing to describe what's looking great is you want to see as much detail as possible without seeing tiling or at least noticeable tiling. So you can go here and play around with the setting until you see a tiling. Let's leave it at 0.02 right now. That looks nice. So I'm going to use that texture to generate a mask. So what I want to do is I want to use the dirt to blend between what is output here and another input to get my mask. So let's try that, and for that I need a mix. So let's grab a mix, and I actually want to get the dirt inside of the first texture port here, and the triplanar output I want to get into the amount. Now let's see what we are getting here right now. This is looking good already. Let's get the texture 2. Let's get a float that we will set to 1. So to get a white result. Now what I actually want to do here is to get a little bit more control over the amount, which controls what texture is used for the port here. And to do that, I'm going to add a gradient in here. So the gradient is giving me a control that I can adjust basically the contrast, the white and black point of a texture. So let me show you by just dragging in that directly here. So I might want to have more white areas here. So what I'm going to do is drag in the white to the left, and this gives me more white space. And if I want to increase the contrast, I'm dragging those both texture ends or knobs towards each other. So what I actually am looking for might be something like this. Let's get only this material shader wired in so we can see exactly what is happening. So when I pipe in my whole shader, you can see that we now created some variants with the dirt and the mask. So let's go through that one more time. So I'm having a mix texture that is mixing based on the amount that's coming in here, which is given to us by the triplanar mapped texture. So that's this result, piped through a gradient to increase the contrast and giving me a bit more choice of how used the metal part is actually displayed. That is mixing based on this map whether the dirt is visible or a white texture is visible. And actually this is then generating a black and white mask. So when I go ahead and solo this node, you can see that the white parts are meant for the material that is the paint material, and the black part is meant for the metal material. Okay, so that's all to it. And if you just follow those steps, you can create a rather nice shader. So obviously the shader is not going into the material here, but into the amount. And if we go back to the way it was before, and then obviously disable the solo mode and just make this a little bit more tidy, you can see that we now have our used metal material here. Obviously we want to tweak a little bit. For example, the dirt is a bit too large still, so let's make it 0.02 or something, maybe 0.05. So you have to be careful to not overdo it, but now we are getting the look as if the material was sort of used, and we get these cool used edges there. Obviously, the shader itself could use a lot of work to look better. So we could add some roughness variation, some bump, and a lot of other things to make it look more realistic. But this tutorial is about how to make this edge effect. Now, to create the dirt in the corners of the material, it's actually exactly the same workflow as with the edges, but you have to invert your dirt. So we get the actual effect that the dirt is also named after, as it produces dirt. So let me try this. You duplicate the material, make it much more rough because dirt is usually not shiny. So let's go to 0.8, pipe it into the input 3, and then go to the diffuse and make it a brownish color, also a bit brighter. And then you want to duplicate this whole shebang here. I can use select hierarchy and then control drag to do that. And then pipe in the amount to the shader here. Now this is giving us the wrong result because it's still not inverted. So let's do that. Let's go to the dirt and let's use invert normal. And then you don't see what it's doing at all. So let's go to solo and give it a much higher radius, for example 1. And now you can see that it's gathering up the dirt in the corners. And if I go to this node and solo it, you can see that the dirt is now also masked by this gradient here. Now the dirt shouldn't be as divided as this right now, so what I need to do is get the contrast lower so we get a more uniform dirt, but not too uniform because it looks better if there's some variance in it still. Something like that maybe. Okay, so last but not least, I want to invert that what's coming out here, because the way I laid out my materials, I right now have no other choice than do a huge rebuild of the whole tree or invert that. So I rather go ahead and just invert that output. And to do so, I'm dragging the invert node on top of that. So that should give us, if I'm not mistaken, let's make this a little bit more tidy still. So let's put that here. Let's drag this down a little bit further. And sometimes Octane has a small problem by going back to the original object materials after a solo action. But when I reloaded that, this is the look I got from that. And this is exactly what I was expecting. So we get the dirty corners and the used metal edges on the object. That's already looking great, but it would, as I said, look much better if you do some work to the individual materials. Yes, you remember correctly, I said something about Vertex Maps. You can use Vertex Maps because dirt has some disadvantages. The disadvantage for dirt is that it's scene geometry dependent. So let me just make a polygon surface here and then move it through the object. And you can see that the dirt is reacting to that plane, which in some cases might be what you wanted, but in other cases you might not want that effect. So you can also see, if I turn that plane so we can see underneath it, that you will get, well, you can't see it right now, but you will also get a metal looking area here, because the inverted areas of the dirt that produce the mask for the metals are also triggered. So if you don't want that, the best method to do the same effect is to use Vertex Maps. And actually it's rather straightforward, because you can just exchange your dirt for a vertex map. Here we go, let's search the vertex map. Here it is. And I already prepared that in my material, so if I just select the right thing, let me just 1 second here. It's a screen getting too cluttered. So we are back here, and I actually found my vertex maps on the object. So when I click here, you can see that's this small side object here that I modeled. Now with vertex maps, you rather want to have a clean STS mesh than any other mesh to work better with clean geometry. So if I click on the vertex map, it's labeled corners. So you can see that the weight is towards the corners. Basically, to weight a vertex map, you can select one vertex or multiple vertices or edges or polygons, and then go to select set vertex weight, and then just set the weight here, for example 100%. Now I have weighted that one vertex, but it also works with polygons or edges. Let's go back, because I don't want that weighted there because it's not a corner. So, and I have a second set. This is named edge. And you can see that the edges are selected here for this one. So we are back here in our normal camera, and you can see I have made the same vertex map on a lot of different objects, all named corner and edge, doing the same thing all over the object. So the good thing is that if we are referencing one name, it is recognized on all the other objects. So let's go back into our material, and instead of the dirt, let's use our vertex map. And we need to drag in our map that we want to use. So let's just take this one here, and I know that we want to have the corner for this one. And we want to have the edge for this one. And then we can actually just replace those. And the only thing you might need to do is to invert the map here. And I think the invert button doesn't work right now. So what we actually need to do is get another invert in here. So let's do that real quick. And now you can see that our vertex map that comes in as a black and white weighted attribute is looking like this, and the edge vertex map is looking like this. And then we are doing nothing else as we did before with our dirt by masking that with a texture. Also the same here for that part. So we get some variance here, and this is then giving us finally our almost same looking dirt based and metal edges based appearance. Now if you say the metal edge is too broad here, you actually can't define a radius as in the dirt. You need to get another gradient to get this sorted out, and you can do that. Let me just reset the gradient by just bringing in the black point, so you get more black areas and less white areas. And then if we go back to our object, which isn't loading, so let's make it load, you can see that the broadness of the metal edges has been reduced, and it's looking rather similar now to what we had before with our dirt. So of course, as you know me, I couldn't help but to tidy up those node trees. You can download this scene from Google Drive if you want to take a look at what I did here and get more into it. This scene contains the dirt-based material as well as the vertex map-based material. Please keep in mind that this was made with the 2018 version of Octane, so it's better if you have that to use it. I am not sure if it would work the same way in the 4.0 or earlier versions. Last bit of advice, so since you're using a triplanar mapping, the structuring of the texture is really dependent on the size of your object. So it might be necessary to, it might be necessary to increase or decrease the size here, the scaling, based on what you're shading. So if you're shading a car that is for some reason really dirtied up, you have to probably scale up the value. And if you want to shade a screw, for example, you need to scale it down. So make sure with soloing those nodes that you have the right scale for your object, because it can look rather strange if you don't. So as always, I hope you liked that video. It wasn't too boring and too long. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next. I thought about to do a more in-depth material series where I go over all the attributes real-world materials have and how you implement them inside of the application. Let me know if you would like something like that. Alright, so have a good start into the weekend and happy rendering. Bye!